Every Saturday night, a group of college degenerates get hammered and wander into the woods. Most of them stick with their group and don't wander off trail. But for that one kid that wanders a little too far, a fun night can quickly turn into a disaster when they wake up in the middle of nowhere and have no clue where they are. I'm in the woodlands of New York, on the edge of the Adirondack mountain range. I'll be bringing with me some items a college kid might have on hand. A couple of beer cans, a broken lighter, a charging cable, and my knife. Using these items and the resources around me, I'll show you how to survive in the wilderness. My first task is to build a shelter for the night. I found a gap in this tree just about the perfect height for the shelter I have in mind, and across it is another standing tree I can use. I'll be building a lean-to shelter. The lean-to is a fairly simple shelter that is great for protecting you from the rain and catching the heat of a fire. I begin by finding a sturdy piece for the crossbeam, a little longer than my height, but I'll need cordage to secure one of the ends to the tree. I could use my charging cable, but I'm going to use natural cordage instead. These woodlands are full of Virginia creepers with roots and vines that grow in vast networks underground. When using any kind of weak cordage, focus more on the number of wraps instead of technical knots. This piece is holding pretty well. Once the crossbeam is supported, it's time to build the roof. I gathered about 30 straight saplings. Most of them were dead pieces of wood on the ground. The pieces just have to be strong enough to support the weight of the insulation. Dead leaves or duff is plentiful in this area and will make good insulation for the shelter. The insulation should be thick enough to stop rainfall and trap heat in. I'll be using the same insulation of leaf litter to get off the ground. You're going to want at least a few inches of leaves off the ground, ideally around a foot. And that's because when you lay on top of it, your body weight will compress the leaves and you don't want to be lying on the cold ground. So right now, this is the perfect height. I could collect even more if I want to pile some leaves on top of me in case it gets cold, but hopefully with a fire going, I won't need that. With shelter done, I can now focus on water. You can generally find water by going downhill, as that's where drainages form. Sure enough, I find a water source and pick the deepest and clearest spot I can find. I fill my empty cans and head back to the shelter. This water may look clear, but there's still a high chance of it hosting harmful pathogens, such as Giardia. To make this water safe, I'll have to boil it, and to do that, I'll need a fire. The lighter I have can produce a spark, but it can't produce a flame. Normally, starting a fire with a lighter would be easy, but the lighter I have is out of gas and can only produce sparks. But the ferrocerium dust produced by the lighter is explosive enough to ignite fine tinder. Gently roll the spark wheel to extract the dust. Be careful not to roll too aggressively, or else you might ignite the dust prematurely. A pile of dust the size of a pea should be enough. Normally, I would be wearing wool socks and not cotton because cotton retains moisture, which can lead to hypothermia and other uncomfortable conditions. But oftentimes, people in these wilderness survival situations will be wearing items of clothing that are made out of cotton, like socks, and in this case, this cotton material is going to help me start my fire. I use my blade to scrape off lint from my socks. After, I gather dry pine needles to serve as additional tinder. The process takes a long time, but the actual fire making is quick. Too quick. The flame is going out before I can add more tinder. After over an hour of fire preparation and failed attempts, I finally catch a break. While my fire grows, I collect larger pieces of firewood for my stack that will last me to the morning. The northeastern United States is full of fallen trees and branches, so harvesting firewood is no problem. Because this can is made of metal, I'll be able to put it in the fire and get it to a boiling temperature to kill the bacteria and other pathogens from that source of water I collected earlier. I can hear the water boiling. It's time to take it off. The can is now cool enough to hold, and we can finally take our first drink. It's funny, I can taste a little trace of beer still in here. Really watery beer. It's too dark to do anything else but rest and go to sleep. It's morning. With shelter, water, and fire taken care of, I can begin to focus on food. Animals ranging from possum to deer call these woodlands home. Like humans, most animals are habitual creatures and will use the same trails every day. Setting a trap on a game trail increases the odds of catching one of these animals. I'll be creating a twitch-up snare using sticks and my charging cable. First, I'll need to create my 2 trap pieces. I'm carving a 7-notch in both pieces. This will serve as my trigger mechanism. Next, I tie a poacher's knot into the cable. This creates a loop that will ensnare the animal. I also tie a clove hitch to secure the cable to my top piece. Now, all I need is a sapling to power the snare. After staking the bottom piece into the ground, lock in the 2 pieces by their notches. The fit should be secure but sensitive so the trap works properly. If you're trying to catch an animal by the neck, you want to set the snare so it's just below head level. In this instance, I set the snare about 1 inch or 2 above the ground for, say, an animal such as a raccoon or a rabbit. And so to get the right height, you just need 2 Y sticks to prop up the noose. And so what happens is the animal is walking through its regular game trail. It goes through the noose and it gets caught. And as it starts to panic and moves away with the noose, the snare moves up. If you want to catch an animal by the foot instead of the neck, you'll be setting up the snare in a very similar way. But this time, the noose will be parallel to the ground. So just like before, we're going to support the loop with a couple of Y sticks. So now when an animal steps into the loop and kicks up, it'll be caught in the same way. But because of hunting laws, I'll have to take this trap down. But if you are setting traps, use your time away from the shelter to also look for other sources of food. Calories are important, but vitamins and minerals cannot be overlooked, as they are needed to keep the body functioning. So while I'm out, I forage for some wild edibles to brew a tea. White pines are very common trees, and their needles are high in vitamin C and vitamin A. The plantain is another common medicinal plant with anti-inflammatory benefits from healing wounds to fighting colds. I use 2 rocks to grind the plants to release their juices. Water has reached a rolling boil, so now it's safe to drink. I take the can out of the fire and drop the pine needles and plantain leaves inside. I make a cup out of my second can. Making something like a cup of tea is also psychologically rewarding. Doing something familiar helps us feel more in control in an unfamiliar environment. Tea looks about ready. The can is still too hot to touch with my bare hands, so I just grabbed some sphagnum moss and I'm gonna use them as oven mitts essentially. Let's give this a try. Really nice to have some nutrients in my body. The mental aspect of survival cannot be overlooked. A positive mindset is key to staying resilient. If you don't know where you are, it's best to stay in place so that search and rescue can find you quicker. But if you do decide to self-rescue, there are a few ways you can increase the likelihood of finding civilization. One way is to travel downhill until you find a water source such as a stream. A small water source will lead to a bigger one, which should eventually lead to people, as humans tend to live around large bodies of water. Finding yourself lost and alone in the wilderness can seem hopeless, but with perseverance and ingenuity, you can survive with next to nothing.